There's a certain kind of prayer you don't just say once. You say it quietly, repeatedly, sometimes out loud, sometimes in your head, when no one's around and no one's listening. It's the prayer that you whisper when you're extremely tired of starting over, the one you pray when you're all alone in your car, the one that you pray right before you go to sleep every night. Half hopeful, half discouraged. God, I just want love that lasts. God, I just want peace. God, I just want clarity. God, I just want this to finally make sense. And you pray it enough times that it starts to feel like almost background noise. Like maybe God heard you the first 100 times and he just hasn't answered or isn't answering. But what if the silence isn't absence? What if it's preparation? Because some prayers don't get answered right away because the answer requires a version of you that doesn't exist yet. We like to think prayer is the work, that asking is enough, that faith means waiting just with like open hands. But faith also means showing up differently, changing your habits, breaking the patterns, learning discipline, letting go of comfort. And that's where this episode kind of lives, in that space between the prayer and the promise, between asking for God for something and becoming someone who can actually hold it. So, welcome back to Chasing Stability. Today, we're talking all about the work before the answer. Why some prayers require preparation, why delay doesn't necessarily mean denial, and how the work you're avoiding might just be the very thing standing between you and what you've been praying for so long. This isn't about earning blessing. It's not about striving harder or doing everything perfectly. It's about understanding that God doesn't just answer prayers, He builds people. And sometimes the most loving thing He can do is ask you to grow before He says yes. One of the biggest misconceptions we have about prayer is that once we ask, we're done. I know I'm guilty of it a lot. Like prayer is this handoff moment where we say, okay, God, it's in your hands now. And then we just wait. But prayer was never meant to replace preparation. Prayer isn't you stepping out of the process to get there. It's you stepping into alignment with whatever it is that you want. Because if prayer was passive, growth wouldn't be required. Change wouldn't be uncomfortable and obedience wouldn't feel like work, right? But someone who's prayed for something big knows that asking is usually the easiest part. It's the living differently afterward that costs something. That's the hard part. You can pray for peace, but still fill your day with chaos. You can pray for healing, but refuse to rest or actually get the help that you need. You can pray for love, but avoid vulnerability. You can pray for clarity, but keep distracting yourself so you don't have to actually sit with your truth. And God isn't ignoring those prayers. He's responding through invitation, an invitation to move, to change, to grow. Prayer doesn't cancel out responsibility. It actually calls it forward because faith isn't just believing God can do something. It's trusting him enough to do your part when he asks. And that's where this kind of gets uncomfortable because sometimes the reason it feels like nothing is happening isn't because God isn't working. It's because he's waiting for you to take the next step. Prayer opens the door, but you still have to walk through it. And that step forward and in through the door, that's the work before the answer. That's where everything happens. For me, that waiting season showed up in my anxiety, especially when it came to doing things alone and still today. I remember praying for peace, for independence, for my nervous system to just like calm down and go back to how it used to normally be. I wanted my confidence back. I wanted my old normal life back. I wanted to wake up one day and feel like myself again without having to think so hard about it. But that's not how it came. Instead, the work looked like small uncontrollable, uncomfortable choices. Going places by myself, even though my chest felt tight, sitting in my car and having to talk to myself through just leaving the driveway, doing things scared instead of waiting to feel ready. And ironically, I'm still learning. This isn't and now I'm healed and fearless story. Most days, it still feels foreign. Days my body reacts before my mind can even have a chance to catch up. Days I have to make peace with the fact that this season won't feel normal for a while, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. Struggling doesn't mean you're failing. Discomfort doesn't mean you missed the lesson. It usually means you're learning something right then and it's new. Then the new things don't come from familiarity, right? I used to think peace would arrive fully formed, like a gift dropped at my feet. I'd wake up one day and my fear would just be gone, and little Miss Independent would just be back inside of me and she'd be ready to live life again like how she used to. But what I've learned is that peace is often built slowly through repetition, through showing up, through choosing trust, even when your body hasn't caught up to believing that yet. And that's where faith met me, not in the absence of anxiety, but in the willingness to move with it, to stop waiting for fear to leave before living again, to trust that God isn't asking me to be fearless, just faithful. Sometimes the prayer isn't answered by taking the fear away. Sometimes it's answered by being given the strength to walk through it anyway. And that's the kind of work we don't always recognize as progress because it doesn't feel like victory, especially in the moment. It just feels extremely scary. But that effort is still movement, and movement is still healing. And that's usually when the waiting begins. There's a space that almost no one prepares you for. And it's that space between asking for something and receiving it. It's where you've already prayed, you've already cried about it, you've already surrendered it to God, and now you're just waiting. Nothing looks different yet. Life keeps moving forward. People around you seem to be getting their answers while you're still sitting here with the questions that weigh so heavy on your heart. This is usually the part where doubt creeps in, where you start wondering if you prayed wrong, if you waited for too long, if you misunderstood what you were asking for in the first place. But this space isn't empty, it's formative because the waiting season doesn't just reveal what you want, it reveals how you handle uncertainty, how you treat yourself when things don't move on your timeline, how quickly you give up when nothing is being affirmed yet. This is the space where impatience shows up, where old habits start calling you backward, where shortcuts start looking extremely tempting. And this is where a lot of people quit and they throw in the towel, not because they stop believing, but because waiting felt harder than just walking away back into what they used to be doing. But here's the thing with that: God often does his deepest work in this space, in the space where you can't rely on outcome yet, where faith has to exist without confirmation, where obedience isn't being rewarded publicly. This is where character gets built, where motives get refined, where you start learning the difference between wanting the blessing and being willing to become who that blessing requires. Silence doesn't mean stagnation. It means something is being rearranged beneath the surface. Because if the answer came too quickly, you might skip the growth that keeps it sustainable, right? The space between asking and answering isn't a pause in the story. It's the part that makes the ending possible. And the part we don't always want to admit is most blessings come with a lot of responsibility attached. And before God hands you something that can change your life, he usually asks you to change how you live inside it first. The work before the blessing isn't glamorous. It's not exciting. It rarely feels spiritual. It looks like discipline when no one is watching, right? Boundaries that feel lonely at first, choosing consistency over motivation, saying no to what feels extremely good so you can say yes to what lasts. You can pray for a healthy relationship, but still avoid accountability. You can pray for purpose, but resist structure. You can pray for peace, but keep feeding the habits that keep you anxious. And that's not judgment. That's just honestly reality because I'm right there with you in the in between that like ask and that movement. God doesn't just answer prayers, He prepares people. I truly, truly believe that. Because if the blessing shows up before the foundation is strong enough to hold it, it doesn't feel like a gift. It just feels like pressure. The work is where you learn stewardship, how to manage your emotions, how to show up consistently, how to stay when things aren't going your way or they're not easy or exciting or whatever. Like everything is changing. And sometimes the reason the blessing hasn't arrived isn't because you're unworthy. Usually that's the farthest thing from it, but it's usually because you're still becoming. You're still learning how to handle it. You're still shedding these old patterns that would break it. You're unlearning the habits that would sabotage the very thing that you're asking for. This is where trust gets built, not just in God, but in yourself. Because when you finally receive what you've been praying for, you don't want to wonder if you can keep it. The work before the answer is the proof that you're ready. Not perfect, not finished, but definitely prepared. And that kind of preparation never goes to waste. At some point in this process, though, the work stops feeling neutral and starts feeling personal. Like life isn't just teaching you something, it's pressing on the exact spot that already hurts. This is the part where you think, why is this happening again? Like, didn't I already learn this lesson? Like, why does it feel harder now than before? And it's tempting to take it as a sign that something's wrong, that you've messed up somewhere along the way, that you're being punished, that maybe the prayer wasn't meant for you after all. But tests aren't about your worth, they're about your readiness. God doesn't test to expose weakness in you. Well, maybe sometimes, but more so, he tests the strength and capacity. The pressure increases not because you're failing, but because you're leveling up. You're learning to make your weakness into your advantages. And yes, it hurts more when the test touches like those old covered up wounds, and especially when it mirrors past disappointments or asks you to respond differently than you used to, because growth always requires a new response. The test feels personal because it's designed for you, your patterns, your tendencies, your blind spots, not to shame you, but to interrupt what would or still is holding you back. You don't get a heads up. There's no announcement that says, like, this is the moment that changes everything for you. Like, look alive. It just shows up disguised as inconvenience most of the time, or as temptation, or as delay, or discomfort. But every test carries an invitation to choose differently than you would have before. And when you do, maybe even imperfectly, or maybe not fully, something still shifts. Not always immediately, not always extremely dramatically, but internally. You start realizing you're not the same person who asked for the prayer. You're steadier, you're more aware, you're more grounded. And that's usually when you realize this isn't happening to you, it was happening for who you were becoming. You know, wanting something and being ready for it are very two different things. You can want the relationship, but not be ready to communicate instead of react. Guilty. You can want the healing, but not be ready to sit with the discomfort that comes before that relief. Guilty again. You can want the purpose, the calling, the next version of your life, the next step, whatever, but not be ready for the discipline and the consistency or the loss that comes with it. Guilty. And that doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. We pray for outcomes, but God prepares us through process. Because if He gave us everything we wanted the moment we wanted it, we'd often ruin it. Maybe not intentionally, but because we were unprepared. Sometimes the delay isn't about timing, it's about alignment. It's about God saying, I see what you're asking for, but I also see what it would cost you right now. And readiness isn't about perfection, it's about capacity. Can you hold the blessing without losing yourself? Can you sustain what you're asking for when it stops feeling new or exciting? Can you steward it on the hard days, not just the super easy, great days? That's why the work shows up first. Boundaries before healthy love, consistency before stability, obedience before clarity, surrender before peace. And this is where it gets super uncomfortable because readiness often requires letting go of versions of ourselves that we have outgrown, but we hold on for comfort. Old coping mechanisms, old mindsets, old relationships, old ways of avoiding pain. You might want the next chapter, but are you willing to release the habits that belong to the last one? It's a hard question to answer. Most of us want to say yes, but most of the time, really, it's no. But God won't rush you into something that would crush you under its weight. So if you're in the season where you're praying, but also being stretched and refined or slowed down or confronted, that's not rejection. That's preparation. And one day you'll look back and realize you didn't just get the thing you prayed for, you became someone who could finally keep it and nourish it and handle it in that time of processing while you waited till you got that blessing. One of the hardest things for me is the moment the work shows up, I didn't recognize it as an answer. I recognized it as an inconvenience or frustration or unfairness. I prayed for change. Actually, I begged for change. And then I resisted everything that would change me. The resistance doesn't mean you don't want it. It means the work is touching something extremely tender inside of you because the work asks for things we've used to protect ourselves, comfort, control, familiar patterns, old identities, coping mechanisms that, used to work back then until they stopped now. And suddenly the prayer costs more than we expected, right? Mentally, that's hard to handle for most of us. We resist because the work exposes where we've been settling, where we've been avoiding responsibility, where we've been surviving instead of living. And instead of thinking, maybe this is shaping me, we think, why is this happening to me? Resistance often looks like procrastinating the thing you need to do or getting irritated with the process instead of engaging in it, wanting the outcome without the transformation, spiritualizing avoidance. Oh, I'm just waiting on God, or numbing yourself so you don't have to feel the stretch. I've done them all. Sometimes the resistance isn't fear of failure. It's just a new beginning for you to become someone new. Let that part die. Not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet, daily choosing kind of way. The work strips the illusion, it removes excuses. It asks you to take responsibility for the ways you've been standing in your own way. And that can feel threatening to the version of you that learned how to survive. So you push back, you hesitate, you question whether this is really from God at all. But resistance is often confirmation that you're standing at the edge of like that peak of growth, right? Because God doesn't force transformation. He invites it. And the work stays until you either engage it or choose to stay where you are. That's the part between asking and receiving. But once you stop resisting, once you stop fighting like that shaping that he's trying to do and make you take for the new role, the work stops feeling like punishment and it starts feeling more like a partnership. And that's when the prayer begins to move, where the resistance eases. Not because the work disappears, but because you stop fighting it and you start seeing it as partnership. This is where the shift happens. You stop asking, when is this going to end? And start asking, who am I becoming through this? What am I supposed to be learning? Like, where am I going from here? And suddenly the work doesn't feel like this big obstacle in your way anymore. It feels like direction. You're not trying to force growth anymore. You're just allowing it to happen to you. This is what becoming looks like, not dramatic transformation, but steady alignment. And here's the part that matters most, in my opinion. The answer doesn't require a perfect version of you. It requires a prepared one, someone who can handle the disappointments without collapsing, someone who can hold joy without fear, someone who can steward peace instead of sabotaging it. These are all lessons that I'm still learning while I'm sitting here speaking this episode. But when you become that person, even though if you're not fully there, even if it takes you a while or multiple times, or you keep starting over, but you believe in yourself, the prayer doesn't feel distant anymore. It feels inevitable, not because you earned it, but because you're ready for it. But this is also where your faith deepens because you realize God wasn't withholding the answer. He was walking right there with you while you grew into it. The blessing doesn't crash into your life. It meets you when you're ready. And when it does, it just kind of like fits together like a puzzle piece because you've been shaped to carry it. You didn't just wait for the answer, you became someone who could finally receive it. Puzzle pieces. You don't have to get this right the first time. You don't have to move through it so gracefully, like step one, step two. You don't have to understand why it's taking so long. I never have. And you definitely don't have to feel strong every single day. God knows I don't. And I still don't. I never have really. Some days showing up looks like momentum. Other days it looks like resting without quitting. Both count equally. Struggle doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It usually means you're doing something that matters. If it feels heavy, it's often because it's shaping you. If it feels slow, it's usually because it's deep. It takes a long time to get to that point. If it feels personal, it's because growth always is. And even though you feel like it right now, you're not behind. You're not late. You didn't miss it. You didn't ruin it. The timeline you're on is forming you for the life that you keep asking for. And even when it doesn't look like progress from the outside, and maybe the most comforting truth of all of that is you are allowed to want the answer and feel tired of the work simultaneously. Most of us usually do. Faith doesn't mean you stop feeling discouraged. It means you keep choosing trust anyway, again and again and again, through all the tears, through all the doubt. So if today all you can do is take one small step or stay still without giving up, or simply remind yourself why you started or why this is important, that's enough. You're becoming someone stronger than you can ever realize, more grounded than you could ever feel right now, more prepared than you think. And one day you'll look back and understand this wasn't the delay, this was all just the preparation. You eventually stop needing constant reassurance, not because the questions disappear, but because you've learned how to live alongside of them. Trusting the process doesn't mean you enjoy every part of it. It actually means quite opposite. It just means you stop fighting the season that you're in. You stop rushing God. You stop rushing yourself. You realize that growth doesn't always feel, super productive, but it's still doing its job. Honoring the work means respecting the version of you now that's showing up right now, even if they're tired, even if they're unsure, even if they're angry or sad or annoyed, even if they're not seeing the growth, even if they're still learning. Because the work you're doing today is making room for the answer you're praying for tomorrow. Every boundary you set, every pattern you break, every time you choose consistency over the easier choice, every moment you stay when it would be easier to quit. It all counts. Baby steps, one at a time. Even if it's so small, it counts. You don't have to force clarity. You don't have to chase the answer. You don't have to panic your way into alignment. You just have to keep showing up honestly and imperfectly, faithfully. And when the answers finally do come, and they will, you will now be able to handle it. You know that you can handle it now because you've already been living in the work to handle it. Faith isn't proven when things work out quickly. It's revealed in that waiting time and in the obedience when no one sees, in the work that you keep doing when the answer hasn't arrived yet or you're not seeing any progress. God doesn't rush his promises, not because he's withholding, but because he's building. He's building depth in you. He's building discernment. He's building a version of you that won't crumble under the weight of what you are asking for in the long run. And if you're tired right now, if the work feels extremely slow or invisible or unfair, that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It usually means you're right in the middle of your becoming season. The delay isn't disqualification. The resistance isn't rejection. And the work definitely isn't punishment. It's just that pesky preparation. So don't despise the season that's asking more of you. And I know that that's a really hard ask, but don't push past shaping just to get to the blessing because the climb is so beautiful too. And don't underestimate what God can do through steady, faithful obedience, even when you don't feel strong. And if you're still here, still trying, still showing up, that alone tells me you're right here with me. And I have a feeling that we're closer than we think to getting all those blessings that we've been praying for so long. And with that, I leave you for the week. If this episode spoke to where you're at in this moment right now, send it to someone who's doing the work quietly too, or share it and remind someone else that their effort isn't wasted, even if it feels unseen in the moment. Make sure you're following Chasing Stability wherever you're listening right now so you don't miss what's coming next. And also, please, over on TikTok, if you're not already following over there as well. I want to believe that we're building something real here. So stay faithful, honor the work that you're putting in, and trust in your divine timing. This is Chasing Stability, and I will meet you in the in between next Tuesday.